Well, with more on the Hogue Commission and the interim report, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Stephanie Levitz, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to the three of you.
Hello, Michael.
So here's the report, the interim report everybody's been waiting for, and when you go through it, a number of things raised by the Commissioner. But I want to begin here with just how well the Liberal government responded to these allegations of foreign interference. Because, you know, we've heard Conservatives time and again argue that part of the reason why the Liberals did not act more forcefully is because it benefited the Liberal Party. But this is just one paragraph out of, roughly 200 pages here, in which Hogue writes, "The evidence I have heard to date does not demonstrate bad faith on anyone's part or that information was deliberately and improperly withheld. But it does suggest that on some occasions, information related to foreign interference did not reach its intended recipient, while on others, the information was not properly understood by those who received it." So does that point more to a flawed process rather than calculated moves, Bob?
Well, yes and no, because the testimony we've heard is that the CSIS director said he did tell the government this. The Prime Minister said he didn't. The CSIS director was called back to say, no, in fact, I did. And she also said, because she passed no judgment on the Prime Minister or his top aides in this particular case, but she did say that you may see some conclusions at the end in her final report in December, including on the writing and Han Dong's writing. So I'm holding judgment to see what she actually says at the end, because there's contradictory testimony, and although she does say that, I'm not sure whether she's talking about these monitoring organizations that withheld information, or that was passed properly, or she was talking about the Prime Minister, because that's not clear.
And that does underline the fact that this is just, again, the interim report, the final one with recommendations expected to be at the end of the year. But what do you make of it, Steph? A flawed process versus calculated moves?
I mean, it's also possible it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B there, right? Because it's also clear, when she talks about, for example, the tension between what some of these oversight bodies thought they ought to be doing and what the parties themselves thought they ought to be learning. And the question is, well, why didn't we can't get at their motivations, right? She says, as Bob notes, she's not passing judgment here. She's not testing the veracity of the intelligence. She certainly didn't conduct her own sort of secret spy level investigation into all of this. She's asking us, as her predecessors have done, to just trust her to say, listen, I've assessed all of this. There's no obvious sign of intent, of malicious intent, let's say, or partisan intent. Just like it's not always clear that it was actually a foreign state acting, you can infer certain things. She doesn't pass judgment on those actions.
Joël-Denis?
Well, clearly, though, I think we can agree on one thing, is that there is some flawed communications between the actual agencies who collect information and how it's transmitted to legislators or people who are in government. This, I think, will be part and parcel of our next report that will be tabled at the end of this year. And we've seen evidence to that point, a testimony by David Vigneault. And I think I've said that on this show. Mr. Vigneault, I think, came back and testified a second time because he was called, but also I think he wanted to reaffirm one thing, that he felt that he was like yelling in the desert for a while, and legislators were not listening about the threat of foreign interference. But on the exercise itself, I think this will benefit Canadians, because we have somebody with legalistic lenses that look at this issue, which is a contrast to the report that was produced by David Johnston, the former Governor General, who was the special rapporteur for the government to look at this issue. I think this is great value, and I think our democracy will come up stronger after the publication of this report, in my sense.
Okay, great value, and in fact that does raise a question I have about David Johnston, because as we know, he was essentially criticized for being too close to the Prime Minister to actually be giving an objective view. But in broad strokes, when you look at this, it seems to really point to very similar conclusions as to the one that David Johnston was reaching. So does this in some ways help restore a reputation that really got hit hard, Bob?
On the contrary, I think it's the absolute opposite. He was really, I wouldn't call it a whitewash, but boy, he wasn't being very critical of the government. And as a result of this public inquiry, we've learned an awful lot. And we learned an awful lot about how the Prime Minister's office and senior ministers viewed foreign interference. They did not take it very seriously. And we've learned that the two oversight bodies for election monitoring, although informed of the extent of Chinese state interference, particularly the disinformation campaigns, they didn't take that very seriously either. And so you have people like Jenny Kwan, the New Democratic MP, who has been targeted by China, saying this is a good report, and she hopes that when she comes back with the final report that we will have a truly independent agency overlooking the monitoring of election campaigns, because when you have senior civil servants who depend on their jobs for the Prime Minister, it doesn't matter whether it's Mr. Trudeau or Conservative Pierre Poilievre or whatever, they're not truly independent. They're nonpartisan for sure, but not truly independent. And I do think that she is absolutely right on this. What we've learned now about foreign interference, and if we're going to be serious about it, to restore trust in the electoral system among Canadians, it has to be truly independent. That means they see this stuff. If they feel it's necessary to issue a public warning or to speak to a member of Parliament and say, you are being targeted by disinformation, you should be taking steps to deal with that.
Steph?
Yeah, I would also say, I think, it was a question of tone as well. When you read the Hogue report, you could almost commend the Commission for the amount of clearly sensitivities it placed on the fact that diaspora communities in this country are affected by this on a daily basis. And that it is trite and unfortunate when the Prime Minister or the government sort of says, nothing to see here, folks, the election was sound. And she is making the point repeatedly in that report, yes, it is true the overall outcome was not affected, but if there is a chill effect on someone who wants to cast a ballot, if politicians are censoring what they're talking about because they're worried about foreign interference, she, and in this report, takes the issue much more fundamentally seriously and in very nuanced, thoughtful through line, which stands, I think, in very stark contrast with the Liberal government, to some degree, the Johnston report, that we're always looking at it high level. The integrity of the election was sound. Well, yes, it was. No one is disputing that. No one, not the losers, not anyone, but everyone. There's a lot of people saying, this is real. It affects me. It hurts my vote. Why is no one listening? And I think for the first time you have a report that says, we hear you.
Yeah, and add to that, not only affects my vote, I'm afraid,
yes,
which is what we hear time and again.
Exactly. One point that I want to make, I think it is critical, is that in the report, the judge is warning the Liberal Party to do its homework for the nomination meetings that they held, because this is the first entry for foreign stars to try to influence the outcome of a federal election. So this is a very strong warning for the Liberal Party that I did not expect that would be in the report. And to me, this is a very, I think it shows that the Liberals, by the way they handle their nomination meetings, may have helped some states to interfere previously in our election.
Well, and that was another point I want to raise, because that is very clearly a distinction being made by the Commissioner. What does that mean? And I know her final recommendations are going to come at the end of the year, but what do you think that immediately means for the nomination process as we prepare for about a year away from another vote?
I mean, the nomination processes need to be really fixed up, because if you win in some ridings in Toronto, for example, or if you're a Liberal, you win that nomination, you're guaranteed to win. Yep. Or in Alberta, if you win a nomination for or Saskatchewan or Alberta, you win a nomination for the Conservatives, you're in. I mean, you're going to be in for a long time. That's why these nomination processes are really important, to safeguard them from foreign interference, because that's where they focus a lot of their energies to get somebody in that they hope will be sympathetic to their interests. But just beyond the nomination, I mean, she was very clear. You've got to do something now, government. You've got to do something to detect and deter this, not just waiting for my final report, but you've got to do something. And that, to me, that has been the best thing that I think the best thing I found out of this report is that she's telling our leaders, our political leaders, do something about this, because it not only affects electoral process, but affects so many people in the diaspora communities who are being intimidated or bullied or being affected by disinformation campaigns.
I'm sorry, I'm going to move on here because we're quickly running out of time. But the last point I do want to raise is the fact that the Commissioner talks about the need to restore public confidence in the whole electoral process as a result of this type of interference. And yet, here we are with the public inquiry. almost a year after the rapporteur's report. You know, does it say anything about how governments need to deal with issues and questions and immediately bring it to public inquiry and drop this whole idea of a special rapporteur for future cases?
I mean, yes, and it puts a lot of pressure, I think, on the government to try and justify in the future whenever they claim that something is secret. Because what is clear from the Hogue process is, even in her limited time, even with the few hours she had available, think about the treasure trove of intelligence materials that were able to be made public because someone in a position of authority pushed back and said, that does not exactly need to be classified. And what happened? Like CSIS and all these guys just bent over and said, yeah, sure. So I think it raises a big question about how transparent our government systems are and how transparent Canadians ought to demand them to become, so we really know the scope of the threats that are facing our democracy.
Joël-Denis?
Yeah, and I want to come back to the point that to this commission, the role that it's playing in trying to restore our faith in democracy, I think it is playing a big role. But in the sense, we still wasted 1 year. This should have been set up right from the upstart, as Stephanie alluded to, and we would be far more ahead now as we are approaching elections in terms of measures to protect our democracy from foreign interference. One more point I want to make, and I want to salute the work of the media in this file, especially the Globe and Mail and Robert and Stephen Chase. They did a great job, and it forced the government to react to a very profound issue that is important to our democracy, you know, in foreign interference. If the media had not been persistent in reporting on those issues, I don't think we'll be there talking about this today.
Bob, on the idea that of a public inquiry, because again, how does it not add to the stain that the commissioner is talking about?
Look,
or delaying to it, rather.
I'm sorry?
Or delaying to get to it, rather.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they didn't want to have this public inquiry because they know that they didn't do a proper job in protecting the electorate. I mean, and it's clear that's what she's saying. We need something to fix this. Now, they're going to. They have a package of legislative measures, which we may see next week or the week after, that will make create a foreign agent registry, that will make changes to the CSIS Act and the Security of Information Act. So much more of this information, CSIS will be able to tell the public about it. And I hope that there is changes to the criminal code to make foreign interference a criminal code amendment, because the police, we've learned from seeing how the FBI operate in the United States, they can quickly go after people for foreign interference, but it's very, very difficult here because we don't really have the laws to do so. And both the registry and making foreign interference, putting it in the criminal code, I think will give the police a lot more leeway to be able to prosecute people who are involved in trying to interfere in Canadian politics and our democracy.
Well, as we say, the final report out at the end of the year, and we'll see what the government does between now and then. Bob, Stephanie, Joël-Denis, thank you for the time.
Thank
you, Michael.